Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting: if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Coming Together Book 2. Maya Delaney's paw print birthmark is the mark of what she truly is, a skinwalker. She can run faster, climb higher, and see better than nearly everyone else. Experiencing intense connections with the animals that roam the woods outside her home, Maya knows it's only a matter of time before she's able to shift and become one of them. And she believes there may be others in her small town with surprising talents. Now Maya and her friends have been forced to flee from their homes during a forest fire they suspect was deliberately set. Then they're kidnapped, and after a chilling helicopter crash, they find themselves in the Vancouver Island wilderness with nothing but their extraordinary abilities to help them get back home. The second book of Coming Together, New York Times best-selling author pumps up the romance, danger, and suspense that left readers of Coming Together clamoring for more. Episode 6. Chapter 1-8. I don't know who was more anxious, Daniel or Kenji, but they weren't making this emergency helicopter evacuation any easier. I patted Kenji and she shifted until her full 100 pounds of German Shepherd rested squarely on my feet. When I tried to wriggle away, she moved closer and pinned my legs. I sighed and glanced at Daniel. He was staring out the window, fingers drumming. I twisted to look at the others. Daniel and I were in the first passenger row, behind the pilot and Mayor Tilson, who was in the co-pilot's seat. Behind us were the mayor's daughter, Nicole, and his niece, Sam Russo, gazing out their respective windows. Haley Morris and Corey Carling sat in the last row. Haley was talking, Corey wasn't listening. "We're going north." Daniel had to yell to Mayor Tilson to be heard over the helicopter noise. "We're supposed to be heading to Victoria, aren't we?" When the mayor didn't respond, the pilot said, "Change of plans, son. Victoria's backed up with evacuees. We're taking you to Vancouver." "Okay, so why are we heading north?" "We live on Vancouver Island, near Nanaimo, which is almost directly west across the Strait of Georgia from the city of Vancouver, British Columbia." "Wind," the pilot said. "Same one that's driving that fire is forcing us to circle north. Don't worry. I'll have you there in an hour." I looked at Daniel. His face was drawn with worry. I couldn't blame him, under the circumstances. We'd outrun a forest fire and outwitted a mysterious fake rescue team only to be whisked from town before we had time to catch our breath. I was worried, too, about a lot of things, but right now, mostly about Rafe Martinez, unconscious on the floor behind my seat. How much smoke had he inhaled? What was he going to do when he found out that his sister, Annie, was still missing? I twisted the bracelet on my wrist. A cat's eye stone on a worn leather band. Rafe's. He'd want it back when he found out that I'd told them not to wake him up because he wouldn't leave without Annie. That would be the end of anything between us. But I could live with that. Better than I could live with myself if I'd let him die in that inferno. "Are the other helicopters going to Vancouver, too?" Daniel asked. "The ones with our parents?" "I believe so," the pilot said. "Is that right, sir?" When Mayor Tilson didn't answer, the pilot glanced over. "Sir." He bent to see the mayor's face and chuckled. "Seems someone doesn't mind the racket this bird makes. He's sound asleep. I'm sure he said the other helicopter was just a few minutes behind us." I leaned forward. The mayor was slumped in his seat, his face toward the window, at an angle that didn't look comfortable at all. When I undid my seat belt, the pilot glanced back. "Whoa, none of that. This isn't a 747. Belt on at all times. Maya, isn't it? I scooted to the edge of my seat and touched the mayor's arm. Mr. Tilson. Hey, the pilot said, voice sharp. If you want me to check on your parents, just say so. Your mayor has had one of a day with this fire, and you kids running off didn't help. Let the man get some rest. Sure, the mayor must be exhausted, but with everything that happened, I doubted he could relax enough to fall asleep. Mr. Tilson, I said, shaking him harder. Daniel undid his belt. Sam did, too, getting up and walking forward, hunched, as she stepped over Rafe. Okay, that's enough, the pilot barked. In your seats, belts on. Everyone. Or what? Sam said. You'll pull over and make us walk the rest of the way. She shook the mayor's shoulder. Uncle Phil. Mayor Tilson's head lolled. Nicole shrieked and fumbled with her belt. I pressed my hand to the mayor's neck. Is he all right? The pilot said, sounding concerned now. He's breathing, I said. Could it be a heart attack? Sam asked. Before I could answer, the pilot cursed and said, yes, that must be it, with the stress and all, and the mayor was, as he put it, a big guy. He'd get a doctor on the helipad right away. What? Nicole said, scrambling over Rafe. Did he say heart attack? If it is, we'll get help, I said as Corey pulled her back. The pilot was on the radio to his dispatcher, filling him in between bouts of yelling at us to sit down. I moved in front of the mayor to undo his jacket. When Sam tried to wedge up beside his chair, Daniel nudged her toward our seats. Anyone else, she'd have told him, but she listened to Daniel. Maya can help, Nicole said when the pilot tried sending me back to my seat. She knows first aid. She runs a hospital. For animals, Haley said. Corey told her to shut up, but she had a point. My dad was the local park ranger, and I had a rehabilitation shed for nursing injured animals back to health. I did know first aid, though, and the basics of dealing with a heart attack victim. Step 1, call a doctor. Kind of tough, under the circumstances. Step 2, give the victim an aspirin. That wouldn't work while he was unconscious. But why was he unconscious? I remembered fainting as one of the signs, but not sustained lack of consciousness. We had to get him to a doctor and, until then, I could only presume it was heart failure and perform CPR if he stopped breathing. I unbuttoned the mayor's shirt. When Nicole inched forward, the pilot snapped at her, and Corey told him, which really didn't help matters. I glanced at Daniel. Nicole, Daniel said, I know you're worried, but he's okay. He's breathing and we're looking after him. He turned to the others. Sit down, guys. Everything's under control. It didn't matter that Daniel barely raised his voice and the pilot's shouting and the noise of the helicopter almost drowned him out. Everyone sat. Even Kenji, who'd been anxiously nosing the mayor's hand. We need to get him lying down, I said. If it's cardiac arrest, his heart may stop. I can't perform CPR while he's sitting. Then you aren't performing CPR, the pilot said. There's no room. We'll be landing soon. I laid my palm against the mayor's bare chest. I could feel his heart. Beating, but fluttery. Was that a sign of a heart attack? As I moved back, I saw a spot of blood on the shoulder of his shirt, where we'd peeled his jacket away. I remembered the mayor putting on his windbreaker before climbing into the helicopter. We need to get his jacket off, I said. As Daniel helped me get the mayor out of it, the pilot yelled, "Whoa! Hold on! Back in your seats! We'll be landing in a few minutes." Fortunately, as long as he was flying the helicopter, all the pilot could do was yell. And if there are teenagers who actually respond to adults shouting at them, I've never met one. When we got the mayor's jacket off, I checked his upper arm. There was a puncture wound. A dot, slightly swollen, crusted in dried blood. Injection. I mouthed to Daniel. He frowned and leaned to my ear. Could be an insect. No, wait. Before we got on, the pilot clapped Mr. Tilson on the arm. I remember the mayor rubbing the spot, like it hurt. He paused. Like he'd been injected. Daniel slowly turned on the pilot. I could feel the rage pulsing off him. I grabbed his arm and squeezed so tight it had to hurt. Only then did he drop his gaze. His heart's beating fine, I said to the pilot. Just have someone waiting at the pad. I refastened the mayor's seat belt, then started moving back toward my seat. I don't know exactly what happened next. My gaze was on Nicole, who looked terrified. I think the pilot grabbed for me. Or maybe he just reached out to get my attention. Daniel yelled no. That's all he did. I'm sure of it. Daniel shouted and the pilot snapped forward. His head cracked against the instrument panel, and he crumpled in his seat. Wake him up! Haley shouted. Someone wake him up! Daniel and I shook the pilot. The helicopter dropped a couple of feet and we stumbled. Corey ran over. Help me get him out, he shouted to Daniel as he grabbed the front of the pilot's jacket. I can fly it. Based on what? Sam appeared at his side. Video games. Corey scowled. You got a better idea? Yes. The boys pulled the pilot out of the way and dumped him in the narrow gap behind the front seats. Sam slid into his spot, grabbed the throttle and the control stick, then planted her feet on both pedals. The helicopter stabilized and began to rise, but listed to one side. You have to get her level, Corey said. No, really. He reached for the control stick. Sam swatted him aside. Do you know helicopters? Or just planes? Because they're not the same. The helicopter leveled for a second, then started to spin. Sam doesn't know what she's doing, Haley said. Stop her. She's keeping us in the air, I said. Everyone else. Daniel said. Sit down and put on your belts. Now. Haley and Nicole obeyed, but Corey hovered at the front, wedged between Sam and me. I reached for the radio and put on the headset. It took some fiddling to get the radio going, but we had a shortwave at the park, so I had some idea how to operate it. SOS. I said. Helicopter out of Salmon Creek. Pilot unconscious. Repeat, helicopter pilot unconscious. I stopped transmitting and listened. Static. SOS. I said. Emergency situation. Helicopter over Vancouver Island. Pilot unconscious. Repeat, pilot unconscious. The helicopter dropped again. Corey bent to look at the control panel. You need to. I'm working on it. Sam snarled. Here, let me. I didn't see what Corey did, but the helicopter pitched to the side, hard and sharp. Corey fell onto the mare. Kenji barked, claws scraping the floor as she slid onto the unconscious pilot. Sam swore, her hands shaking as she reached for a lever. Everyone sit down. Just sit down. The helicopter lurched again and Sam's hand hit something. A crack and a rush of air. Nicole shrieked. This time, Haley joined her. The door. Corey said. The door's open. Everyone hang on. Daniel yelled. Maya, grab Kenji. I lunged for the dog's collar and, just then, I heard a gasp. Everyone was yelling and wind rushed through the half-open door and I shouldn't have heard anything. But I heard that gasp. Rafe! I screamed. As I turned, I saw a blur of motion. Rafe, his eyes opening as he sailed across the floor of the helicopter. Out the open door. 2. I didn't think. I shoved Kenji into the safe nook between the front seats and scrambled toward the door as the helicopter jolted again, righting itself. Daniel lunged for me and missed. Wind rushed in through the open door. I could barely breathe, barely see. Then I saw Rafe's hands gripping the bottom frame. Rafe's hands slipping from the bottom of the door. I dropped and grabbed his wrists just as he lost his grip. As he fell, I shot forward. I kicked wildly, trying to hook something with my legs. Then someone caught my foot and I stopped with a jolt. I didn't need to look back to see who had me. The same person who'd had my back since we were 5. Daniel. Corey, get over here, he shouted. The helicopter lurched, and I slid again, Daniel still holding my ankle. My hands were locked around Rafe's wrists, his around mine. Then Corey caught my other foot, and the helicopter leveled off. I could hear them shouting inside. Their words came in fits and starts, sucked away by the wind roaring past my ears. And in those first few seconds of confusion, I didn't really even understand what had happened. I could hear the wind. Feel the wind. Taste it even. But it took a moment for me to crack my eyes open and realize I was hanging outside the helicopter. Hanging outside the helicopter. The earth bobbed and whirled below us, trees and rock and water spinning into a blur. Don't look down. I thought it was Daniel, but then realized Rafe was staring up at me. I've got you. I shouted. He smiled, this weirdly calm smile. I know. Just hold on. I am. We'll get you down. It's okay, Maya. His voice was as strangely calm as his smile. My heart was thudding so hard I could barely breathe, and he just kept smiling up at me, his gaze locked on mine. Calm washed through me, slowing my heart, as if I was feeling what he did, an oddly disconnected peacefulness. It's okay, Rafe said again. They've got you. The helicopter spun, whipping us around. Pain shot through me as Rafe's weight almost wrenched my shoulders out of their sockets, and my hold on his wrists broke. Corey lost his grip on my leg. I heard him shout and Daniel shout and the girls join in, and I kicked, trying to get my leg back up where someone could grab it. The helicopter tilted again. I started to slide, Daniel sliding with me. And I knew we were going to fall. Rafe, me, Daniel, we were all going to fall. Hold on. I shouted to Rafe. It's okay, he said, and I wasn't even sure he spoke aloud, didn't see his lips moving. It's okay. He let go. I clawed the air, screaming. I didn't even see him drop. The helicopter banked and I caught only a blur of treetops spinning past, and when I looked around, there was no Rafe. No sign of him at all. Corey and Daniel dragged me back into the helicopter. Someone got the door closed. I don't know who. I was crying and shaking so hard I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't think. As I huddled on the floor, I felt Daniel behind me, his arms around me. Kenji I pushed onto my lap, and I buried my face in her fur, gripping handfuls and sobbing against her. It took a moment before anything else penetrated, but when it did, I heard Sam and Corey arguing, Nicole crying, and I felt the helicopter jerk and shudder, and I remembered where I was and what was happening. I couldn't break down now. No matter what had happened, I couldn't break down now. I pushed my dog away, patting her head, and staggered to my feet. Daniel rose with me, his hand still on my arm. I'm what? Fine? Good? Okay? No. I'm not. I'm absolutely not. I took a deep breath. We need to land. My voice shook. My whole body shook. I could hardly breathe, it hurt so much. But I squeezed up to the front of the helicopter. Sam glanced over. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He might be okay, Nicole said. He might. He's not, I said. We all know he's not. I couldn't even hope Rafe had survived because that would mean I'd have to think about him and what just happened, and if I did, I'd curl up in a ball on the floor again. I started towards Sam. I had to talk to her. Get her to land the helicopter. But I froze. Just froze. Daniel nudged past me. We need to land this, he said to Sam. That's what you've been trying to do, I know. His voice was calm, reassuring. But we need to get her down, any way we can. Before anyone else gets hurt. She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled on the controls. Daniel crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder. How much do you know about flying? My dad had a friend who was a helicopter pilot. He showed me how. That was a couple of years ago. It's not the same as his helicopter either. I'm really trying, but I know you are. How do we get her down? We're over the strait now. Does that help? Water. I don't think so. I need open ground. Just a small piece, but I can't find any. It's all trees and... What about that island? Daniel pointed to one of the many small islands dotting the strait below us. It was partially bare, as if the owner had cleared it for building. I can try, Sam said. From most people, the hesitation would be expected. From Sam, the girl who was afraid of nothing, it meant our chances were slim. But what choice did we have? Nicole was trying to rouse her dad. Haley was doing the same with the pilot. I took the headset and got on the radio again. No one was responding. So either we tried to land or we kept flying until Sam lost control and we plunged into the strait. You can do this, Sam, Daniel said. You know you can. He kept reassuring her as I worked on the radio. Why wasn't anyone answering? The pilot had been talking to someone just before he collapsed. Or had he? Even if he had, I realized it was probably whoever he worked for. Whoever told him to drug the mayor and fly us off course. And who was that? Who would do that? The same people who'd chased us through the blazing woods? You're doing great, Daniel said to Sam as treetops came into view. I could jump out from here. You might want to do that, she said shakily. Tell you what, Daniel said. Take her lower, and if you don't think you can set her down, everyone will jump. Everyone except you and me. Okay. She nodded. And it's not like landing a plane, right? He continued. You just set her down, nice and... A yelp from Haley cut him short. I wheeled to see the pilot shoving her aside as he started for us. Haley screamed, then said, "He burned me." Oh my God! I could actually smell burned fabric, and there was a brown patch on her shirt. As the pilot lurched forward, I swore his eyes glowed. "Hey!" Daniel said. "Hold on." The pilot yanked Sam out of the seat and slid in. "Just put her down here," Daniel said. "We lost." The pilot pulled up on the control stick and the helicopter started to climb. Too fast though, lurching sideways. The helicopter spun. A treetop passed the windshield. Nicole shrieked. The helicopter dropped. The pilot swore and reached for something. The tail hit the tree. Metal crunched as everyone went flying. "Seat belts!" Daniel shouted as the helicopter lurched. I heard Corey yell, and looked back to see a hole in the tail end of the helicopter. Daniel yanked me onto his lap, and managed to get the belt over both of us. "Kenji!" She stumbled to me and I grabbed her with both arms, wrapping them around her as tight as I could. I heard Nicole yell, "Dad!" And then we hit. 3. The helicopter landed nose down and tilted onto its side. My head cracked against Daniel's and I must have lost consciousness for a moment, because next thing I knew, water was flooding in. The helicopter creaked as it teetered, and I knew we must be perched on an underwater ledge, over what could be a very deep body of water. I twisted to tell Daniel, but he was already pushing me toward the other side, saying, "I know." Then, "Everyone! Get over there!" I glanced back to see Nicole and Sam sitting there, just staring. Corey bent over Haley, then picked her up. She lay like a rag doll in his arms. "She's okay," he said. "Just unconscious." "Dad!" Nicole shrieked. I turned toward the front seat. The pilot was dead. He'd gone out the windshield, and was now draped over the crumpled front of the helicopter. Tendrils of blood snaked through the water all around him. Mayor Tilson still wore his seat belt, but he was wedged in, the crushed dashboard pinning his big chest. Blood dribbled from his mouth. I pressed my fingers to his neck. "No pulse." I began. "No, he's not." Nicole shoved me so hard the helicopter rocked. "Let's get him out of there." Daniel looked for Corey, who was still holding Haley. "Sam? Give me a hand?" "Nick and Maya, stay over by the door with Kenji and keep that side weighed down." Sam and Daniel grabbed the mayor under his armpits and pulled, but he wasn't budging, and with every wrench, the helicopter rocked. Daniel bent to peer under the crushed cockpit, and Sam checked her uncle for a pulse. When Daniel came back up, shaking his head, she shook hers, too, biting her lip and blinking hard. Daniel turned to Nicole. "He's gone, Nick. There's nothing." "No, he's not," she shouted. "You're only saying that because Maya did. You always listen to her." Everyone stopped and stared. Sweet, quiet Nicole stood there, her face twisted with rage, hair coming loose from her ponytail, spiking around her face, her mascara running. I moved up to Daniel and Sam and whispered, "She's in shock. Let me see if I can get his legs free." "There's no use," Sam said. "He's..." My look shushed her. I squeezed in as far as I could to get a better look, but the slightest movement made the helicopter rock. "You need to get off," Daniel said as he crouched beside me. "Of course she does," Nicole said. "You're always worried about Maya." "Why? She doesn't deserve." Sam spun on her. Daniel and I stared at both of them. It was Corey who murmured, "Nick didn't mean it, guys. She just lost her dad." "And I just lost my uncle," Sam said. "Take Nicole out," Daniel said. "Please." Before. The helicopter groaned again and began to tilt. Off! Daniel shouted. Everyone off! He grabbed the door handle. Sam and I helped, all three of us yanking until it finally opened. Water poured in, but it only came up to mid-calf. Land was a few meters away. Corey went first, carrying Haley. Sam, Nicole, and I followed. The helicopter jerked. I lost my footing and plunged backward into the icy water that filled the cockpit. Daniel grabbed my arm and Kenji swam to me, taking my shirt in her teeth and hauling me until Sam could pull me out, Daniel right behind us. The helicopter gave one final wail, metal scraping on rock, then rolled off the ridge into the deep water. Kenji! I shouted. Sam and Corey had to hold me back as I fought and screamed for my dog. Daniel jumped in. He'd barely gone under when Kenji surfaced. I ripped free from the others and waded to the edge as Daniel climbed back onto the ledge. Kenji's nails kept slipping on the underwater rocks, but with me pulling on her collar and Daniel pushing from behind, we managed to heave her up. We waded through the knee-deep water toward the tiny island. As soon as I was on land, I let myself collapse and would have stayed there if Daniel hadn't caught me under the arms and propelled me to higher ground. I was about to drop on the grassy bank when Corey shouted, "It's Haley. She's not breathing." I stumbled to where he crouched beside her. "I was sure she was breathing before," he said. "I should have let you check." Haley lay on her back in the long grass. Her skin was tinged blue. Daniel steered Corey away as I ripped open Haley's shirt and started chest compressions. He set Corey down and told him to stay there, then returned, and took over the compressions while I breathed into her ice-cold lips. On my third breath, I felt her chest move. On the fourth, she coughed. We got her sitting up and breathing. What happened?" she said, looking around. "Where's the helicopter?" I told her. She just sat there, nodding, like it wasn't sinking in, but when I asked if she understood, she snapped that she wasn't stupid, and I backed off. I kept backing off until I found a flat place to sit. Daniel slid in behind, arms around me, letting me lean back against him. Kenji came over and put her head on my lap and I cried then. Just cried. When I could finally speak, I twisted to face Daniel and said, "It's my fault Rafe's dead." "No, it isn't," he said fiercely. "I'm the one who knocked out the pilot." "How? You never touched him." I don't know. I startled him or something." I shook my head. "You didn't. I don't know what happened, but it wasn't your fault." "I'm not talking about the crash anyway. I mean that if it wasn't for me, Rafe wouldn't have fallen." "No, Maya." He let go. "I saw it. He made a choice and there was nothing you could do about that." He did the right thing. If he'd held on, you'd have fallen, and maybe me, too. I know it doesn't make this any easier, but he did the right thing." "That's not what I mean. He should never have been on that helicopter. If I'd let them wake him up, he'd have insisted on staying to find Annie." Daniel shook his head. "They'd have put him on that helicopter whether he wanted to go or not. But he'd have been awake. He wouldn't have fallen. If he resisted getting on, they'd have sedated him, just like they did with the mayor. You know he'd have resisted. Nothing would have changed." When I tried to look away, he caught my chin and turned me to face him. "Nothing," he said. My eyes filled with tears again. "It doesn't seem real. The fire. The people in the forest. The helicopter crash. Mayor Tilson. Rafe." I looked up at him again. "It can't be real. I'm asleep. It's a nightmare." Tell me it is. He hugged me so tight my ribs protested. I wish I could. His voice cracked and I hugged him back, as hard as I could. Someone cleared his throat behind us. It was Corey. He crouched and said, in a low voice, I know this is a bad time, guys. I'm really sorry. But the girls there freaked out and they need someone to tell them what to do and, that's not me. They want one of you too. Daniel, I'll stay here with Maya if you can talk to them. I wiped my sleeve over my eyes. No. Sitting here isn't going to help. It just gave me a deep, dark pit to lose myself in when I really couldn't afford to be lost. We both got up and followed Corey. Nicole and Haley were huddled in the long grass, staring out at the island to the west. Vancouver Island. Our island. Shrouded in fog. The girls were shivering. Even Sam, leaning against a tree, twisting the bar in her ear, was trembling, though she kept giving herself an abrupt shake, as if annoyed by her weakness. I had to give myself a shake, too a mental one as I took stock of our surroundings. With the fog rolling in, I couldn't tell how big our island was. But it had looked small from the air. The ground was rocky, with patches of long grass and scrubby trees. The sky was overcast, so dark I thought night was coming until I checked my watch and realized it wasn't even 6. Mom had been in Victoria when the forest fire broke out. Was Dad with her now? Were they waiting for our helicopter to land? Planning what we'd have for dinner to take my mind off the forest fire? Had Dad's helicopter gone to Victoria? Was it only our helicopter that had been diverted or? Maya. Daniel said. Don't think about that. Can't think about that. We needed to get someplace warm and dry before dark. I whispered that to Daniel. He gestured for me to walk with him. We're going to scout the island, he told the others. No one offered to come along. No one said a word. They just nodded, their gazes as empty as I felt. We need to tell them everything, Daniel whispered as we walked away. Otherwise, they'll want to wait for rescue. Which we know we can't do. Because we don't know who'll come for us. Real rescuers or fake ones. He nodded. I struggled to get my brain in gear, but I felt like I was still out in the water, fighting to keep my head above the surface and wishing I could just sink into peaceful oblivion. I blinked hard. Sorry. I'll talk to them. No, I will. You just need to back me up. Can you do that? I nodded. Tell them what was going on. God, that sounded so easy. But where to start? It began less than a week ago. No, that's not true. It began a year ago. When Serena died. My best friend. Daniel's girlfriend. Serena had drowned. It shouldn't have happened, not to the captain of the school swim team, swimming in a calm lake. Then Mina Lee came to town. She called herself a reporter, but everyone figured she was a corporate spy. We live in Salmon Creek, a town of 200 people that was built and owned by the St. Cloud Corporation, so they could conduct drug research. Mina came to Salmon Creek pretending to be writing an article on the local teens what it was like growing up in a tiny corporate town. She'd really wanted to talk to us and she was especially curious about Serena's death and Daniel, and I began to think that she suspected the medical research was responsible. A few days later we'd found Mina Lee's body in a cougar cache. Had she been killed by the big cats? Or died of misadventure in the woods? Or had she been murdered and dumped? We broke into her cabin and found files on all the teens in our class. Only 2 were missing. Mine and Sam's. Sam had stolen hers. When confronted, she said it was because she didn't want others knowing her parents had been murdered. But we'd started wondering if there was more to it, if she might have had something to do with those murders, something to do with Serena's death, too. Then there was the note Daniel had found in Mina's cabin. 4 strange words in it, including Benandanti. Italian witch hunters. We knew the word because of Mina. She'd left him a note to call her, on a library book page about Benandanti. I'd recognized other words on that list. Yinald Lushii. Skinwalker. A few days before, I'd been called that by an old woman who'd said that's what my paw print birthmark meant. That I was a skinwalker. A shape-shifting witch. Crazy, hey? Except I was. So were Rafe and Annie, who'd come to Salmon Creek looking for the girl who'd been another subject in an experiment to resurrect the latent skinwalker genes. That girl, apparently, was me. So all that happens, and I'm trying to figure out how to tell Daniel I'm a skinwalker when the forest fire struck. Daniel, Rafe, and I got caught in it. We'd seen a fire and rescue truck, and Daniel got a bad feeling he gets them. I've learned to trust them. Turned out it wasn't fire and rescue. Who was it? I don't know, but they'd been after us, and one man knew my name and had my eyes, and I was pretty sure I knew what that meant, but I refused to process it. Too much else waiting in the queue. So how much should we tell the others? I trusted Daniel would know. Normally, we'd hash it out together. But today, I needed him to take charge and he did that. As we walked, Daniel and I scouted the island to be sure there wasn't any shelter. In order to get off it, we'd need to swim, which carried the risk of hypothermia. Not something we cared to do if there was an alternative. There wasn't. The island didn't have so much as a rock pile big enough to hide behind. So we returned and Daniel explained to the others what had happened in the woods as we'd been fleeing the fire. It sounded like these people deliberately set the blaze, he said as he finished. Maya and I thought they were trying to clear Salmon Creek to get into the lab and steal the drug research. But if the pilot drugged the mayor, then that doesn't make sense. We were already leaving town. How do you know he was knocked out? Sam asked. I saw the pilot grab the mayor's arm, Daniel said. Right before we got on the helicopter. Mr. Tilson rubbed the place, like it hurt. Then Maya found the injection spot. So they wanted Mr. Tilson? Haley asked. Daniel shook his head. We think whoever set the fire either bought off the pilot or planted one of their own guys. I heard Mr. Tilson say that the first helicopter had already landed in Victoria. That means whoever is behind this wanted ours. In the evacuation plans, we're all supposed to be on that helicopter. Not Mr. Tilson specifically, though. Just an adult to chaperone us. So in sedating him, they were getting rid of our chaperone, I said. They wanted one of us. I thought of the list Daniel had found, with the word Skinwalker on it, and I thought of the man in the woods, who'd called me by name. So I seemed to be the one they wanted. But when I glanced up, Sam looked like a cartoon character with a humi bubble over her head. It doesn't matter who or what was the target, I said. We need to figure out what we're going to do now. Why do we need to do anything? Haley said. They'll come looking for us. Yeah, Sam said. That's Maya's point. The people who tried to kidnap us will come looking for us to finish the job. You don't know that. Sam's right, Daniel said. The first people who come for us will likely be the kidnappers. It'd be safer to get to a phone and call our parents. Everyone looked around. The mainland was a dark blob on the eastern horizon. To the west was Vancouver Island. About a kilometer of water separated the two. Corey began. Not to question your judgment, buddy, but that's a bit of a swim. The water's cold. I bashed my knee good in the crash, and I'm not the only one who's hurting. I get what you're saying, but the pilot's radios seem to be out, so they won't know where we are. If we light a fire, someone out boating might see us. That's a good idea, Sam said. Or it would be. If we had matches to light a fire. Or if anyone was actually out boating. Why don't we just find a place to hide? Haley said. That way, when someone does come, we can see if it's a real rescue or not. How are you going to tell the difference? Sam said. Ask them. And no one's going to find the crash site. You know why? There is no crash site. She pointed out over the empty water. When the helicopter had dropped over the ledge, it had disappeared. Only a few small pieces of debris floated, already being dispersed by the tide. And we don't know that the radio equipment wasn't working, Daniel said. Whoever wanted that helicopter may know exactly where it went down. That didn't keep Corey and Haley from arguing that we should stay put, and Nicole from quietly agreeing. Which off Sam all the more. To us, the danger was obvious. We should be in the water already, swimming for Vancouver Island. To the others, it was too much to believe, too much to take in. Easier to think this was all a tragic mistake and that a rescue team would find us at any moment. Eventually, Daniel and I managed to persuade them that no one was going to come for us. There was no shelter on this island, and there could be cottages just past the shoreline on the mainland. Finally, they all agreed to swim for it. 4. Swimming for the shore was not a simple matter. Daniel and I were soaked, but the others were dry from the knees up, and in October, they'd need that dry clothing. The problem was how to get it across. There weren't any backpacks in the debris floating from the wreck, but Daniel rescued a piece of plastic. The others stripped to their undergarments, wrapped up their clothing as best they could, and put it in the plastic. Daniel made sure Corey put his headache medication in, too. Corey got migraines. Bad ones. Unfortunately, all he had on him was a couple of tablets he carried loose in his pocket. By the time we got to the water's edge, we were all shivering so hard I could hear teeth chattering. A layer of marine fog covered the surface. As I stood there with my toes in the icy water, tendrils of fog slipped around my ankles and I remembered a line about fog coming in on little cats' feet. Cats. Cougars. Skinwalkers. Rave. My stomach clenched and my toes clenched, too. I closed my eyes and struggled to ground myself. Can you see the land? Nicole whispered beside me. I pointed. See the treetops above the fog. She nodded, then rubbed down goosebumps on her arms. About earlier. I don't know why I blew up like that. Your dad just died. I know, she nudged a submerged rock. I'm still sorry. It's okay. Are you sure we should do this? Haley called from a few feet away. It's so cold. Is it safe? I looked over at her and Corey and Sam, standing along the shoreline, arms wrapped around themselves, their faces as grey as the fog. Fear and confusion on every face. Terror on Sam's, as she stared wide-eyed into the fog. Daniel and I went first. Kenji circled me as I eased into the water. When she realized I wasn't just taking a walk into the surf, she leaped in front of me, barking, ordering me to dry land. I continued on, up to my waist now. She snapped at my fingers and tried to herd me back to shore. Maybe there's something out there, Nicole called. Didn't someone catch a great white shark a few years ago? And we have plenty of killer whales. Great whites don't come this far inland, I called back. And I doubt this stretch of water is deep enough for orcas, but even if it is, they don't attack in the wild. You're only at risk if you're jumping into their aquarium tank. Kenji just knows Maya doesn't like to swim, Daniel said. Here, I'll take her. He reached for her collar. She growled and he pulled back. Or maybe not. Kenji lowered her head and whined, as if in apology. She's scared and confused, I said. No, we are, and she's sensing it. Just give me a sec to calm her down. I petted her and promised her it was okay. Once she'd relaxed, I told Daniel to go on ahead with her, so she couldn't see me. She glanced back a couple of times, but when I seemed to be staying put, she let Daniel take her for a swim. Corey went in behind Haley, herding her. She was on the swim team, so she should be fine, but she was still disoriented from her near-drowning experience. Sam went next, her chin up, expression unreadable. Daniel had asked Nicole, who was also on the swim team, to go last and help anyone who fell behind, namely me. I'd estimated the strip of water to be about a kilometer. That's just over 3,000 feet. Not a short distance. Not an incredibly long one either, or so I kept telling myself as I paddled through the frigid water. It was half of the distance from my house to the park gates. 1/6 the distance of the run for the mountain event I did in Nanaimo every year. 1/20 the distance of the Harbor City half marathon I ran last fall. Easy. Except for the fact that I loved to walk and run, but hated swimming. Part of my skinwalker heritage, I guess. When I get in water deeper than a bathtub, there's this part of my brain that screams at me to get out, and no amount of self-talk ever silences it. But maybe this time that part of my brain realized, as a cougar would, that there was a difference between swimming for pleasure and swimming for survival. While I was cold and uncomfortable, I stayed relatively calm. Even managed something close to an actual breaststroke, which I'm sure made Nicole happy, stuck at my snail's pace as the others pulled away. Every now and then I could make out Daniel's dark shape as he glanced back to check on us. No one said a word. Only the splash of hands and feet hitting water broke the eerie silence. I couldn't see how much farther we had to go. Couldn't see how far we'd come. Just fog everywhere, my friend's dark blotches in the gray. Sam was huffing off to the side. She liked to scrap, but she wasn't an athlete, and she sounded winded. I was about to veer her way when she stopped puffing, as if she'd gotten her second wind. Or stopped swimming. I opened my mouth to call to Daniel to check on her. Before I could speak, my foot brushed something. A fish, I presumed, but then it wrapped around my ankle and yanked me down. I didn't fight at first. Something had my foot. Something was pulling me under. Just like a year ago, when Serena drowned. For a second, I thought, that's it, I'm having a nightmare. Everything that had happened today, the fire, the crash, Rafe, was clearly just part of a bad dream. It had to be. Then I began to choke and the survival instinct took over. I kicked. I flailed. But something kept dragging me under. No, not something, someone. When Serena drowned, I'd been so worried about her that I'd paid no attention to what had me. This time, I could feel warm fingers wrapped around my icy cold ankle, and when I kicked, my toes brushed what was unmistakably hair. I tried to grab whoever was holding me, but every time I moved, my attacker moved. I couldn't see anything. My eyes stung and my lungs ached. But I knew it was a person holding me down. Just a person. I could fight that. Only I couldn't. I kicked and I writhed, but those fingers weren't letting me go and I couldn't breathe, and when nails dug into my ankle, I shrieked and my mouth and throat filled with more water, and I realized I was drowning. Then the toes of my free foot touched rock. The bottom. I pushed myself down even as my brain screamed that I was going the wrong way. I bent in half and reached to feel not fingers, but vegetation wrapped around my ankle. Seaweed. I ripped it off, then shot toward the surface. After a few strokes, I wasn't sure I was still going up. All I could see was darkness. Then a scream sounded above me. They were looking for me, yelling for me. I was going the right way. I was going to be fine, just fine. I put everything I had left into a few last strokes, propelling myself toward the surface, breaking through, then gasping for air too soon, water rushing in, choking me. I went under again. I gave a tremendous kick, arms and legs flailing so hard that a cramp shot through my stomach and I screamed, swallowing more water. I could hear Daniel shouting, then Corey. But no one was coming. Why wasn't anyone coming? I broke the surface again, and this time managed to get a breath. Then I heard Nicole screaming for help that something had her, was pulling her down. A fresh cramp shot through me and I went under again. My muscles pleaded for relief, but I managed to break the surface again. Maya! Daniel yelled. Where's Maya? Nicole shrieked and I wanted to shout to Daniel to forget me, save her before she drowned like Serena. That's all I could think of. How he'd saved me when Serena drowned. I wouldn't let that happen again. I couldn't. Nails scraped my arm and I panicked, then felt wet fur. Kenji. I wrapped my arms around her neck and lay my face against her back, flutter kicking as best I could. Daniel reached me then. Nicole, I said. Get Nicole. He hesitated. I pushed him toward Nicole, getting more and more frantic until Corey called that he and Haley had Nicole and she was fine. Sam. I croaked. Sam. Daniel yelled. Where are you? She's Corey started. Here she is. She's fine. Daniel made me get on his back and we headed to shore, Kenji swimming beside us. FV. When we made it to shore, Daniel didn't insist on getting to dry ground this time, just let us all collapse where we could, panting and shivering, Nicole crying softly, Haley trying to comfort her, Sam hovering awkwardly. We emptied the makeshift pack. It'd been on Corey, and he'd gone under in the search. We'd tied it as best we could, but there were openings. The clothing was wet. His pills had disintegrated. He said that was fine, he wasn't likely to get a migraine soon and if he did, he could tough it out. Which was a lie, but there was nothing we could do about it. Daniel made the others put on their clothing, coaxing gently but insistently. Theirs were almost as soaked as Daniel's and mine, and they huddled there, shivering and sniffling. The sky was so dark now it looked like night already. It smelled like rain, too. None for weeks and now it came and there was a small part of me that thought, it'll put out the fires, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My forest might be saved, and all I could think was that night was coming and the temperature was dropping and if it did rain and we couldn't find shelter, get dry, and try to light a fire, hypothermia would kill us by morning. We'd all be dead. Just like Rafe. I pulled my legs up, wrapped my arms around them and shivered as I tried to get myself under control. Just beyond this rocky beach was the forest. I'd seen it earlier. I knew the forest. It was my home more than any house ever could be. I'd survive this. We'd all survive it. But no matter how hard I stared to the west, I couldn't see the trees. Just fog and shadows everywhere, the six of us lost in it, as if we'd already died, stumbled into the afterlife and... What happened out there? Corey asked. I looked up. He was pivoting slowly, shoulders tight, on guard against... Against anything. Everything. Whatever could be lurking in that rolling field of grey. Something pulled me under, Nicole said. It wrapped around my foot and I couldn't get away. That's what happened to you, too, Maya, isn't it? Corey said. I nodded. It pulled me to the bottom, then let go. Nicole and I compared stories. She didn't have much to tell. Something grabbed her leg and pulled her down. Did it feel like a bite? Seaweed? She didn't know. Finally Daniel turned to me. Was it like what happened with Serena? I nodded. Serena? Haley said. How would she know that? No offense, Maya. I mean, I know you were there and it was awful, but... Something dragged Maya under that time, too, Corey said. Daniel pulled her to safety. Silence. I knew what they were all thinking. Daniel pulled Maya to safety. And Serena died. It was my fault, I said. He didn't know Serena had gone under, too. Maya tried to tell me, Daniel said. I didn't understand. It was my fault. It was no one's fault, Sam said. Neither was this. Maybe there's something out there. Giant eels or whatever. Giant eels. Corey let out a whoop of a laugh, too loud and too long. Desperate to cast off the fear and unease and find his old self again. Hey, I'm not the moron who was worried about great white sharks, said Sam. That was NIC. It doesn't matter what happened, Daniel said, only that no one was hurt. He looked at me, then Nicole. You're both okay, right? Well, I mean... I know you're not okay, but... I'm fine, I said. Nicole nodded. Me, too. Haley straightened, as if not to be outdone. Getting her footing, like me searching for my forest and Corey for a joke. We were all stressed out. We'd deal with it our own way. At least we were dealing with it, not curled up on the beach in fetal positions. Right now, that was the best we could hope for. It was night by the time we'd gotten ourselves together enough to head out. There were no lights anywhere to break the fog and the darkness. We walked along the shore for a bit, but couldn't find any docks or boat moorings. So no cottages just across the water, as we'd hoped. We needed to head inland. As we walked in silence, Kenji whimpered, reacting to the tension. I could feel it myself, bristling through the air like electricity. Every time she made noise, the others would jump, and look around as if they expected grizzly bears to lumber out of the fog. Only Daniel stayed steady, assuring everyone that Kenji was just nervous because they were. I was, too. I think that's what got her going the most. I kept telling myself I was fine, that the forest was right there. I could smell the sharp tang of evergreens. But when the wind whined around us, I jumped with everyone else. Finally, I saw trees and my heart stopped pounding. I walked faster, needles crunching under my feet, the sound, the smell so familiar that my throat ached, and I had to reach out, fingers brushing the boughs as we passed. The fog disappeared, as if kept at bay by the trees. Safe. I was in the forest, Daniel was beside me and I was safe. Maya. Corey said behind me. Maybe, this isn't such a good idea. I turned. The others were 10 feet back, barely inside the tree line. Nicole and Haley had moved closer to Corey. Sam hung back, looking into the woods as if I was asking her to jump off a cliff. "The fog's gone in here," I said. It was marine fog. "It doesn't penetrate the forest yet," Corey said. "I'm thinking the fog's not such a problem. It's very dark. We don't know what's in there." "Yet, we do," Sam said. "Bears, cougars, wolves. None of which are nocturnal," I said. Actually, they were crepuscular, which meant they were most active at twilight, both dawn and dusk. In other words, right about now. But I wasn't telling these guys that. They'll stay out of our way if we stay out of theirs. "But how can we stay out of their way if we can't see them?" Haley asked. I turned and looked into the forest. I could see fine, but I was part cat. To them it would be dark. Very dark. "I'll lead," I said. "Kenji and I spend so much time in the woods that our eyes adjust quickly." "I don't know," Haley said. "It's really dark. And really spooky." I turned again and saw a scene worthy of a tourist brochure: a rocky, natural path dotted with unfurled ferns and soaring, vine-ribboned redwoods. Somewhere to our left, a nighthawk trilled. Even the leftover fog was like fine lace drifting past on a cedar-perfumed breeze. "I'm not seeing spooky," I said. "Dark, yes, but what's spooky about it?" "What's not spooky?" Sam muttered. Haley pointed. "You can't tell me that isn't creepy." I followed her finger to see branches draped in elegant, pale green Spanish moss. "That? Seriously? It's moss, Haley, not an alien life form. We just escaped a helicopter crash and a death brush with something in the water. That was scary. This is the forest. This is where we're going to find shelter and water." "Shelter? I don't want a cave, Maya. I want a house, and we're not going to find that in the middle of." Daniel stepped between us. "All right. This isn't helping. We have to get through these woods in order to find help. That could mean holing up for the night, but we'll be okay. Maya knows her way around the woods and so do I. You need to trust us to look after you." He spoke to them, but it was for my benefit, too. A reminder that they didn't have our experience and they were not going to see the forest the way I did. I led everyone for a while without any sign of light or noise from a road, then I veered south. Instinct, I guess. On Vancouver Island, like anywhere in Canada, the population tends to shift south. Most times that's for warmer weather. The island, though, is temperate rainforest, meaning we rarely see the white stuff. We gravitate south because it's simply more hospitable land. While my sense of where we'd crashed was vague, I knew it was north. Probably a long way north. The pilot's goal, I suspected, had been someplace more remote. It wasn't a stretch to think that the people responsible for this and for setting the fire that got us out of town were the scientists my birth mother had escaped 16 years ago. Yes, Sam seemed to think they might be after her, but I was sure I was the target. That meant I had to rescue myself. Get to a phone, call my parents, my adoptive parents, and tell them everything. Yet my escape couldn't jeopardize my friends. If it came down to it, I'd need to get away, separate them from the danger I posed. For now, they needed me to navigate the forests and find help. Heading south was easy so far I could hear the crash of waves and smell the ocean to my left, meaning we were going the right way. We hadn't walked very far, though, before Corey stopped as we were circling around an outcropping of rock. "Is anyone seeing lights anywhere?" Corey said. "Because all I see is bushes. We need to get higher." He started scrambling up the rock pile. The stones were dark, covered in lichen. Slippery lichen. Stop! I said. His foot slid and the leg he'd hurt in the crash buckled. We jumped to grab him, but his knee cracked against rock as he fell. He let out a yowl and a string of curses. His jeans had split and underneath, his knee was bleeding. When I tried to touch it, he grabbed my hand. I need to check it out, I said. The skin had been scraped from his kneecap. It felt whole underneath, but he gritted his teeth at my touch, meaning it was probably badly wrenched. We're going to need to wrap it, I said. Or you won't be able to walk. The only thing we could spare for wrapping was socks. Daniel gave his and I tied them together. When the socks were wrapped around Corey's leg, he could stand, with effort and Daniel's arm for support. Figures, Corey muttered. Survive a forest fire, helicopter crash, and killer eels, only to slip on a rock. That's what you get for trying to take charge, Haley said. No kidding. We made it to a grassy clearing, but Corey was in a lot of pain. Walking was only making it worse. Getting to a higher spot to look around is a good idea, I said after we sat him down. We'll find a tree while you rest. Whoa, wait. Corey started struggling to his feet. I'm okay. I'll be slow, but I can move. He doesn't want to be alone, Haley said. You know how he is. Leave him alone and he discovers he's not as much fun as he thinks he is. Corey shot her the finger. She was right, though Corey really wasn't one for enjoying his own company. People seemed to feed his bottomless well of energy. I'll stay with him, Nicole said. Daniel nodded. Haley and Sam, you guys should stay, too. Maya's going to be the one scaling a tree. Kenji and I will stand point, but everyone else should rest. We won't go far. Plenty of trees nearby. Haley agreed to stay behind. Sam did not. Daniel seemed annoyed, but she didn't get the hint. In the end, it was easiest to let her come. There's something I need to talk to you guys about, Sam said once we were out of earshot of the others. About what happened on the helicopter. You did an amazing job, Daniel said. If it wasn't for you, none of us would be here, I said. She went scarlet at that, and trudged along for a few minutes before she continued, it's not that. It's about, when the pilot was knocked out. What you did, Daniel. Daniel didn't get within 3 feet of him, I said. That's what I mean. All he did was yell. I must have startled him, Daniel said. Except that Daniel had done the same thing when we were escaping the fire. Whatever it was, he hadn't just yelled loud enough to startle the men. Not when it happened twice. But Daniel stared at us with honest confusion. It's not important right now, I said. Actually, it might, Sam shook her head. You're right. It can wait. SX. We didn't go far from the others. My sense of direction in the forest was uncanny, as my dad always said, along with my ability to find my way back to a spot, but I wasn't relying on that now. I stopped under a huge tree and said, I'm going up. I'll look for lights. Daniel boosted me to the nearest branch. Tree climbing here isn't easy. Many redwoods are like telephone poles vaulting to a canopy of greener limbs way over our heads. It's a matter of finding the right tree to shimmy up. What made this climb difficult wasn't the tree itself. I'd spent the last couple of hours trying to forget what happened on the helicopter. What happened to Rafe? That had been easy when we had to keep everyone moving forward. But when I went up the tree, it reminded me of our climbs together. I could hear his laughter, feel that strange pulse, as if I could sense his heart beating. He seemed to be right beside me, and if I just looked over, I'd see him there, grinning and more than once, I almost gave up and slid back down. Told them I couldn't do it. I was too tired. The tree was too difficult. I let a few tears fall. I caught my breath. And I kept going. Rafe had died to save me, and now I had to help save everyone else. I climbed as high as I could, past the point where I heard Sam say to Daniel, "Should she be going that high?" Near the tree's crown, I looked out and my heart plummeted into my soaked sneakers. Trees. That's what I saw. An endless expanse of inky black trees. I stayed up there for about 10 minutes, straining for any sign of light, even the flicker of headlights on a distant road. Then I climbed back down. "It's dark," I said, after I leaped to the ground. Yeah," Sam said. "It's night." "How you expected to see anything?" She stopped as she realized what I was really saying. "Oh. I'll try again in the morning." But we all knew that if there'd been any houses or inhabited cabins nearby, I should have been able to spot light. We trudged back to the others and told them. "There must be people out there somewhere," I said when we finished. "We're not in the middle of Alaska. The nearest house can't be more than 10–15 kilometers away." "Which Corey can't walk with his busted knee," Haley said. "I know. That's why we'll split up in the morning. I can move fast. 15 kilometers isn't even a half marathon." "I'll go with you," Daniel said. "I can keep up. For tonight, though, we need to get someplace more sheltered." I nodded. "We'll need to find a stream, too. Fresh water." "You mean we have to go farther into the forest?" Corey said. "We got off that island for you, but I'm not sure we should be hiding so far away that we won't see a real rescue team if they come." And so it began. Round 2 of the Great Debate. Once again, we split along the same lines. Sam, Daniel, and I wanted to push on, while Corey, Nicole, and Haley wanted to stay. Daniel could have swayed Corey. But he was injured and we couldn't bring ourselves to insist he tramp through the forest in agony. We finally agreed to head closer to the beach, where they could spend the night. We'd return for them in the morning. Splitting up felt wrong, like we were just being stubborn. Yet as wrong as it felt to separate, it felt even more wrong to stay so close to the crash site. Also, Daniel and I were soaked. We needed to try starting a fire to dry out. We couldn't do that within sight of the crash. So Sam, Daniel, and I left Corey, Haley, and Nicole and continued on with Kenji. We located a stream and followed it until we found a cave where we could spend the night. Well, not so much a cave as a sheltered spot under an outcropping of rock. But sheltered was the key word. Plenty of dead vegetation had blown in and dried out, and Daniel managed to knock rocks together, get a spark, and light a tiny blaze. Considering I'd escaped a raging forest fire earlier that day, I was good with tiny. We huddled around that small campfire and tried not to think about how cold it was or how hungry we were. Kenji was dry now, and she felt like a furry hot water bottle between Daniel and me. I should be able to find nuts in the morning, maybe even some late berries. For now, there was nothing we could do about it. We'd drunk from the stream and it was indeed fresh water, and that was all we needed, however much our stomachs disagreed. I looked at Sam, huddled with us by the blaze, and I figured now was a good time to ask her some tough questions. No way was she going to stomp off into the night, away from the heat. "You know why those people took us," I said. "Or you think you do?" "It has something to do with you. With why you were searching Mina Lee's cottage, why you took her file on you, and why you flipped out when I grabbed it." She said nothing. Daniel had stretched out on his side, cheek propped on his hand. He lifted his head now. This isn't the time to keep secrets. If you think you know why they're after us, you need to. Benandanti. Daniel sat up. What? Benandanti, Sam said. It's. We know what it is. A cult of Italian witch hunters killed during the Inquisition. She stared at us. Where did you hear that? Mina sent Daniel to a book at the Nanaimo library, I said. She gave him a reference and page number. It led to an article on the Benandanti. Oh. She paused, then nodded, her expression, satisfied. Pleased even. Well, the book didn't get it right. They never do. Benandanti weren't witch hunters. They were demon hunters, who evolved into general-purpose evil hunters. Supernatural evil, that is. So sure, witches would be a target, if witches were hurting anyone with their powers. So would sorcerers, werewolves, vampires, half-demons. Especially half-demons, because they have demon blood and demons were the Benandanti's original target. You're saying this like, you believe in it, Daniel said slowly. Rafe had said skinwalkers had gone extinct, but other races hadn't. He hadn't said what those races were, but I figured it was all those paranormal types Sam just mentioned, ones we still saw in movies and books, continuing to play a role in folklore after others faded. Because they had continued to exist while others, like Benandanti, had not. You know why Mina sent you to that page, right? Sam said. I figured she picked some random entry in a book no one ever checked out. Really? She met his gaze. Is that honestly what you think? He shifted position, his expression lost in the shadows from the flickering fire. When he didn't answer, Sam continued. The book probably told you the main power of the Benandanti was dream walking. They leave their bodies to hunt evil at night. People believed that because it explained how Benandanti seemed to strike without anyone seeing them, without leaving a trace on the bodies, without their victims fighting back. The truth is that Benandanti do have powers, but dream walking isn't one of them. They can sense trouble. They can repel trouble. And they can charm and persuade people to do things they might not want to. Does any of that sound familiar, Daniel? He didn't answer. Sam carried on. Everyone knows you get bad feelings about people, and you're usually right. I bet you got really strong vibes from Mina Lee. She was a half-demon. You might have gotten weaker ones from the pilot, too. He was a minor half-demon, I think. With the power of fire, judging by those burns on Haley. Mina's power was teleportation. Daniel had his hand near his mouth, his eyes half closed, expression deliberately hidden. I could see the pulse throbbing in his neck as his heart beat faster. I remembered what he'd said about Mina the first time we met. There's something wrong with her. I remembered how she'd seemed to vanish, not once but twice. Teleportation. And the pilot. Fire. You also have the power of persuasion, Sam continued. I've seen you flip it on like a light switch. It's been getting stronger. Maybe you're telling yourself that you just have a knack for leadership, but deep down, you know it's more than that. And the power to repel evil? I saw you do it on the helicopter. That's how it works. Like a sonic boom. You didn't even need to touch him. It's not a perfect power, though, which is why Benandanti are also naturally skilled fighters. She met Daniel's gaze again. You're seriously going to tell me none of this sounds familiar? If you're saying I'm one of these Benandanti. Yeah. That's my point. He shook his head. No. It's crazy. I know something happened on that helicopter, Daniel said. And it happened earlier today, in the forest with Maya. Whatever it wasn't normal. So if you tell me I have some kind of psychic power that throws people when I get mad, I might believe you. But witches and werewolves and demon hunters? I don't know where you got all that stuff from, but I'm a Benandanti, too, Sam said. Only my parents didn't hide it from me like yours did. I couldn't finish. Couldn't you tell from my awesome charisma? Sam gave a twisted smile, almost sad. My parents said it would develop, along with my other powers, but I kinda think I'm missing that part of the equation. Missing the control part, too, as you may have noticed. I got the fighting bug, and it bites whether I want it to or not. I could sense that Mina was a half-demon, but I missed it with the pilot until he grabbed Haley. I don't have the repelling part yet, either. So that's why you thought Mina was investigating you? I said. Daniel looked at me sharply, as if to say, you're buying this? Before I could speak, a figure burst from the trees, breathing so hard she doubled over. It was Haley. They came, she panted. I crawled out of the cave and stood. Rescuers. She shook her head. At first, that's what we thought. They pulled up to the island in a boat and they sent a diver into the water. Corey said we had to be careful, just sit tight and watch, but Nicole wouldn't listen. She went down to the shore, waving her arms and yelling, and they saw her and they started coming toward her on the boat. When they got about halfway, she turned and started running back to us, and they shot her. She fell against me, shaking, and I put my arms around her. What? Sam said, scrambling up. Who shot Nicole? When Haley didn't answer, Sam tried to wrench her from me, but I shook my head and motioned for her to wait. When she quieted a little, I asked, could you tell if she was okay? She wasn't. Oh God! Haley hiccuped a sob. They shot her in the back, and she fell. She fell and she didn't get up. Corey wanted to go after her, but I wouldn't let him. I know that sounds awful, but there was no way we could get to her without getting shot ourselves. All we could do was watch. They came on shore and they picked her up and carried her to the boat and put her in, and she never moved, and we knew she was. Haley caught on the word, tried again, choked, shook her head. Gone. We knew she was gone. Then they started shining lights at the forest and we heard them say that we all must be in there. I wanted to run, but Corey couldn't, so he told me to come find you. I didn't want to leave him, but I made sure he was hidden under some bushes, then I snuck away. We quickly decided Sam should stay behind with Haley. Daniel and I had just left when Sam came running after us. How much do you guys trust Haley? She said. Haley and I were not friends. I'd been doped at my 16th birthday party. Hard to believe it had only been a few days ago and everyone was sure it had been Haley. Since when do you trust her? Sam continued. You know she doesn't like you. Think about it. Shooting Nick? Does that make any sense? Not unless you want a story that'll make us come running back, straight into a trap. What if these people grabbed Nicole, Corey, and Haley? They'd want one of them to lure us out of hiding. Who would do it? I looked at Daniel. He rubbed his mouth, thinking. Then he said, Haley seemed really upset. I don't think she's that good an actor. If it played out the way you said, Haley would have used the opportunity to escape. She'd tell us Nicole and Corey were both dead so we could all run. As usual, Daniel's argument worked for Sam, and she agreed to go back and wait with Haley. If he did have some magical power of persuasion, he didn't need to use it with her. Had she always sensed what he was? Is that why she liked him? Were they really both Benandanti? Was it a coincidence I'd ended up in the same town as another supposedly extinct supernatural? That Sam ended up in the same town as both of us? When Rafe had said we were part of an experiment, I'd wondered if it was connected to Salmon Creek, a medical research town. But they did drug research, not genetic work. Besides, I'd been adopted at birth and my parents had moved to Salmon Creek for a job. That had seemed to rule out the possibility of a connection. But now, I glanced at Daniel. Since Sam left, he'd been walking in silence, following me on autopilot. I should tell him what I was, let him know there might be a connection. "How are you doing?" I said. "Okay." I began. "I don't know what to think," he interrupted. "What happened in the forest, when I yelled at that guy? I thought I'd hit him without realizing it. I was mad enough, seeing him pointing that gun at you. But when it happened again on the helicopter, with the pilot, I knew I'd done something. I just didn't know what." After a few more steps, I opened my mouth, but again he got there first. I think Sam might be onto something. Everything she says is true. Even about the pilot. I had a bad feeling, when we got on the helicopter, but only a slight one, and with everything that happened, I figured I was just stressing out. I don't believe the parts about demons and all that, but I can see maybe having some power to sense bad vibes in people. I mean, it's not like she's saying I'm a vampire or a werewolf. That would be crazy. This is just a little weird. No, it wasn't like she'd said he was a werewolf. It wasn't like she'd said he could change into an animal. That would be crazy. I shut my mouth and carried on in silence. 7. When we drew near the place we'd left Corey, we realized going straight to him wasn't wise. We decided to take a look from farther down the shore. We could hear a boat motor, but the running lights were off. There were people on board with flashlights, though, so we could see where it was. Did that mean everyone was back in the boat? Did they have Corey? A distant splash told us someone had gone in the water. Retrieving the bodies? Removing identifying parts from the helicopter? It sounded far-fetched, but if you kidnapped kids in a helicopter that crashed, you didn't want local fishermen finding the wreckage. Daniel tapped my arm. I followed his outstretched finger and saw 2 more flashlight beams strafing the forest right around where we'd left Corey. I gripped Kenji's collar as we crept closer. Another flashlight beam flickered through trees farther down. 3 searchers. At least 2 more on the boat plus the diver. So how would we get to Corey? Was he even still there? If they'd found him, had they? My brain stuttered over the thought. Shot him? That was the easy way of saying it, like it didn't mean what I knew it meant. Killed him. Nicole was dead. Nick, I whispered. Nix. We don't know that, Daniel whispered harshly, and I knew that's what he'd been telling himself. It's what I'd been thinking, too. Shot. Just shot. Haley hadn't seen exactly, so we could keep telling ourselves Nicole was only injured. Kenji whined and brushed my hand, and I patted her head. Corey, Daniel whispered. He meant we couldn't think about Nicole. Just like we couldn't think about Rafe. We had to focus on saving everyone else. Oh God! How had it come to this? Where I had to concentrate on saving the friends I could. Forget the ones I couldn't. The ones I'd lost. The ones who were already Daniel clutched my arm. Maya, he whispered. I need you. I nodded and took a deep breath to steady myself. Then I got us as close to the searchers as I dared, picking my way through shadows too dark for Daniel to see. I stopped, and we hunkered down. I wrapped both arms around Kenji, whispering for her to stay quiet. After a moment, a radio crackled. No, we haven't found them, a male voice said. And we're not going to. Even if they stuck around, they'd see us coming from a mile away. Especially after you shot the girl. I couldn't make out the voice on the other end. Yet, well, by that time, they'll be long gone. If they aren't 50 feet underwater. More unintelligible murmuring as the person on the other end responded. Just because you only found Jason and the mayor doesn't mean they were the only ones who died. The others could have fallen out or floated from the wreck or... Another man's voice. One that didn't come from the radio. One that made the hair on my neck stand up. The man in the forest. The man who'd pointed a gun at me. The man who had my eyes and my cheekbones. The kids are fine, the man continued. They're in excellent shape. Athletes, all of them. Champion swimmers and runners and fighters. Whatever else this Saint Cloud screwed up, they did that right. They made them survivors. I'm SOR. You want to keep your job? Then don't apologize. Just find these kids. Find my daughter. Blood pounded in my ears and I grabbed a tree for support, nails digging into the bark. Find my daughter. He meant me. I'd known that. From that moment in the woods, I'd known it. I just hadn't wanted it to be true. Daniel gripped my shoulder, squeezing until I looked at him. It's okay, he murmured. We can do this. I could tell by his expression that he hadn't heard what the man said. He didn't have my enhanced hearing. I had to forget what the man said. I'd always known I was adopted. Rick Delaney was still my real dad. He raised me. Nothing else, no one else mattered. I whispered to Daniel, telling him the other things that the men had said. They're after all of us, Daniel said. I think so. I don't get it. I think I do. I think it wasn't any coincidence that my family wound up in Salmon Creek. It wasn't any coincidence that Sam came here, either. They found me and they found her, and they brought us back to Salmon Creek, with the rest of you. I don't know what it all means, but I'm starting to understand. I can't tell you any of that, though. I wish I could. God, I wish I could. Maya. I wanted to throw my arms around his neck and apologize. I'm sorry, Daniel. I should have told you earlier. I screwed up and I think I'm still screwing up. He hugged me and whispered, it's okay. We'll figure it out. I pulled away. I think I might have figured it out already. This isn't the time to explain, but I think Sam might be right about you and her, and I think there's more to it, and that's why they're after us, so you need to be careful. We'll both be careful, he said. We'll have each other's back. As always. As always. We'll find Corey, then we'll get out of here, Daniel continued. Get to a phone. Call our parents. Go home. I'm not sure we can do that. I'm not sure Salmon Creek is still there, and if it is, I'm not sure it's safe. I'm not sure we can get Corey. I'm not sure he's still. Corey's fine, Daniel said, as if reading my thoughts. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not holding up very well. Yes, you are. We just need to get this done, then you can have a breakdown. I'll join you. I smiled. Thanks. Anytime. Now, let's go. Like a cougar with a cache, I knew where we'd left Corey. Haley said they'd moved a little, but he'd be close enough for me to find him. The 3 searchers were still at work, but they seemed to be employing a grid pattern, like when a little boy in a neighboring town had gone missing and we'd all joined the hunt, systematically scouring the forest until we found him, scared and exhausted. Once we realized that these searchers were walking a grid, it was a simple matter of waiting until they'd passed the area where we'd left Corey so we could sneak in. Still, they'd abandon the grid if they heard something. So Daniel stood guard with Kenji, and I got down on all fours and crawled. When I saw a white shoe peeking from under a bush, I crept closer and whispered, "It's me." Corey started at the sound of my voice, then caught himself. "You guys shouldn't have come back." "We did. Now, shhh, before I regret it." I crawled under the branches and gave him a quick, one-armed hug. I whispered that we'd wait a minute to make sure all was clear. Then I said, "We're going to crawl out of here until we get to Daniel, so he can help you walk." "I can walk." "Don't play the hero or you'll get us captured." "That's so sweet. Makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside." "Hey, I hugged you, didn't I? Now follow me and try not to make any noise." "Yes, ma'am." He leaned down toward my ear. "I like it when you order me around. It's really hot." I stifled a laugh, and for the first time since we'd gotten in that helicopter, I felt a little more like myself. With his wounded knee, crawling wasn't easy for Corey. It was more of a half-crawl, half-drag. When we reached Daniel and Kenji, Corey shakily got to his feet, tested his knee, then slung an arm over each of us. We made our way through the forest, avoiding the flashlights. It was slow. Excruciatingly slow. When we finally got back to Haley and Sam, we set Corey down and I took another look at his knee. It had scabbed over and was bruising. I touched it, gently, pretending to check it out, as I closed my eyes and concentrated on fixing it. That was supposed to be one of my powers, healing. It worked with animals, but I didn't know how it worked or if it would work on people at all. I tried anyway, focusing and brushing my fingertips over his knee, willing it to heal. There was no way of telling whether it helped. With animals, it was never an instantaneous cure. They just seemed to get better strangely fast. I hoped for the same with Corey. When I finished rewrapping Corey's knee, Daniel said, "I know we're all ready to drop. But if there's any chance we can put a little more distance between us and them." "We should," I finished. Sam and Haley struggled to their feet. I could tell they were exhausted, but they didn't complain. Maybe they were beyond that. Daniel put Corey's arm over his shoulders and we set off again. Egged. We headed farther inland, not really going anywhere, just going. No one talked. No one even asked what was going on. Why were these people after us? Why had they shot Nicole? Reasons weren't important. We trudged through the woods, Kenji and I in the lead. After a while, I let her go ahead and pick the clearest path. The shock of Nicole's death had dulled my senses. I didn't see the beautifully gnarled old trees and the delicate new ones. I just saw trees. Endless trees. When I heard the mournful hoot of owls or the staccato patter of paws, I didn't stop to listen. Even the smell of cedar seemed too sharp, acidic. As I strained to pick up every smell I usually hated on my forest walks, the stink of gas or diesel fumes, the acrid scent of smoke. Signs of life. Human life. There were none. Even when I managed to pull my thoughts away from Nicole's and Rafe's deaths, I still found plenty to dwell on. I thought about Annie and wondered where she was, if she was alive, if she was safe. Could she take care of herself? She was 19, but since she began shape-shifting, she'd started regressing intellectually, reverting to a more animal-like state. That's why Rafe had been so determined to find the scientists who'd reactivated our skinwalker gene. Because he hoped they could help Annie. Would the same thing happen to me? I thought about the man on the shore, too. My biological father. I tried not to dwell on that, didn't matter, wouldn't let it matter, but those thoughts only led to ones of my biological mother, who'd abandoned me as an infant. I used to say she was giving me a better chance at life, but Rafe told me she'd had 2 babies. Twins. She gave me up and kept my brother. My twin brother. Were they still out there? Was he still out there? Again, it wasn't the time to dwell on that. But I did anyway. At least until I started thinking about my parents, my real parents, and worrying about them took over everything else. I finally snapped out of it when I realized we'd started walking uphill. I blinked and looked around. Fewer trees. More rocks. Ahead? Pitch black. I had to crane my neck way back to see stars dotting the night sky. A mountain. Daniel said. I jumped, and realized he was right beside me. Probably had been for a while. He put his hand on my back to steady me and said, "What did you say?" I know why I couldn't see lights from the treetop. There's a mountain in the way. Daniel lowered his voice. Corey's not going to be able to make it up that. Not tonight. I don't think any of us could make it up that tonight. Except maybe the 2-time island wrestling champ. I struggled for a smile. Don't count on it. I'm running on fumes here. Let's find a spot for the night then. We should be far enough from the crash site by now. We headed off the deer trail we'd been following and found a clearing next to a dead tree that acted as a windbreak. Once Daniel and I pronounced it suitable, everyone pretty much just collapsed where they stood. Daniel and I were the last ones standing. When I started to lower myself to the ground, he tapped my elbow and pointed to a spot a few feet away. "Looks more comfortable," he said. There was a slight hollow there, where dried vegetation had collected. As I lay down, I could smell it, sharp and earthy, and the smell comforted me as much as the soft bedding. Kenji curled up in front of me. Daniel stretched out behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, and that relaxed me, too. If anyone had asked me 5 minutes ago if I could sleep, I'd have thought the question was insane, but my head had barely touched the ground before I was gone. Maya. I rolled over. Dead needles crackled under me. My foot bumped Daniel's, and he mumbled in his sleep. Maya. Another restless toss. A branch jabbed me this time, hard enough to make me open my eyes. I could make out the faint grey of dawn to the east. I blinked and looked around. Corey, Sam, and Haley were about 5 feet away, sound asleep. I yawned and curled up again. Maya. Help. I bolted upright. A breeze wafted past, and I caught a smell I recognized. Rafe. I got to my feet, careful not to wake the others. Kenji snorted, but she was too exhausted to stir. Once away from camp, I lurched blindly through the forest, following that teasing scent on the breeze, pushing the branches aside, not slowing down to look for a path or even a clear route. I stumbled into a stream. Icy water filled my shoes, and I slipped and fell to my knees. Maya. Where are you? I called. Over here. I'm. A sharp intake of breath. Hurt. Okay, stay where you are. I'm coming. I broke into a jog. Only no matter how fast I ran, his scent and his voice didn't get any stronger. I kept going until I tripped over a root and hit the ground hard. Maya. Just. Maya? Is that you? I pushed to my feet, wincing as I flexed my stinging hands. I'm. Maya. I need you. His voice seemed to come from all around me. I spun, trying to pinpoint it, but he kept yelling, more panicked with every shout, my own panic rising until I flung myself forward. Hands grabbed me and yanked me back. For a moment, all I saw was the darkness of night. Then it fell away, dawn light filtering through the trees, and I was standing in front of Daniel, his fingers wrapped around my wrist. Kenji was beside me, whimpering. Maya. I have to go, I said, wrenching from his grasp. It's Rafe. He's out here. He's hurt and... I turned and saw Sam and Haley, then heard a crashing in the undergrowth. Corey lurched through, using a branch for a cane. I blinked. Sam and Haley hadn't been there a second ago. I hadn't heard Corey crashing through the bush. It hadn't been this light out. I looked up to see the sun now above the horizon. My eyes filled with tears. I swallowed. Daniel took both my wrists and turned me to face him. You were sleepwalking, Maya. It just... I could hear Rafe and he was hurt and I was trying to get to him and my breath hitched. It seemed real. Daniel pulled me into a hug and I let myself collapse against his shoulder. I kept thinking about how real it had seemed and how I'd never sleepwalked before and what if I hadn't been sleepwalking? What if I'd been having a vision? Not that Rafe would really be calling for me. As that cold dawn light hit, I realized how silly it seemed, Rafe just lying there, yelling for me. If he could move, he'd be moving. But if it had been a vision, that could mean Rafe really was out there. Really hurt. Really trying to find me. I pulled away from Daniel and turned to Sam. Do you know where Rafe fell? I asked. Where the helicopter was. Her lips parted as if to ask why. Then she gave a soft, oh. I don't mean exactly, I said. Obviously, you can't tell that. But do you have any idea? We were over the island, right? To the south of here? West? Southwest? Did you notice any landmarks? Maya, Daniel said. I turned to meet his gaze. I know I was sleepwalking, but it might have meant something. I lowered my voice so the others wouldn't hear. A vision. Like the one I had with the marten. I'd had a vision of one of my recuperating animals, telling me how it had been injured. That wasn't. Daniel stopped himself. I knew he'd been about to say that it wasn't the same. He was right. It wasn't. But when he saw my expression, he couldn't finish, and when I saw his, I wished I hadn't said anything. He looked as if he was in pain. Real pain. Wanting to give me hope. Knowing he couldn't, and that it wasn't right to try, wasn't fair. We were too high, Corey said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. He couldn't have survived, Sam finished. A normal person couldn't have survived. But Rafe was a skinwalker. Part cat. When I looked at Daniel, though, I knew I couldn't say that. The more I clung to impossible hopes, the more I hurt him. And we had been too high. I could argue and bluster and tell myself maybe, just maybe he'd survived, but I knew better. Rafe was dead and if I was dreaming of him, that was my guilt talking. He was dead and I felt responsible. I'm sorry, I said. I need to sit down. Daniel took a tentative step toward me. I'm okay, I said. Just give me a minute on my own. Then we'll go. I found a quiet spot where I could sit on a log and recover. Kenji followed and sat with her head on my lap, dark eyes troubled. A few minutes later, I heard someone looking for me, and I knew it wouldn't be Daniel. If I said I needed to be alone, he'd give me that space. When Haley stepped around a tree, I stood. Sorry, I said. You guys want to get going, right? She shook her head and came to sit beside me on the log. I hesitated, then lowered myself to it again. I think we should try to find Rafe, she said. I took a deep breath. I know he didn't make it. But you'll feel better if we look. We might as well go in the direction the helicopter came from. Just in case. She had a point. We had to walk. Why not walk that way? I shook my head. If we're going back for anyone, it should be Nicole. If there's a chance she's alive. There isn't. Not from what I saw. And if she did survive, that means they want her alive, which means she's safe enough for now. I think we should try to find Rafe. I turned to her. I know you liked him. Everyone's focusing on me, but you lost him, too. No, I didn't. He was yours. He didn't belong to any. I only started flirting with him to make Corey jealous. Then I guess I did kind of fall for him. But the guy I was crushing on wasn't Rafe Martinez. Not the real one, anyway. I get that now. He was showing me someone else. He was showing us all someone else. Everyone except you. That's not. Corey told me what Rafe did on the helicopter. How he let go so he wouldn't pull you and Daniel out. The Rafe I knew wouldn't have done that. Wouldn't even have thought of it. He didn't mean to trick you, I said. He was looking for something in Salmon Creek. Something he really needed to find, to help his sister. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. Not Haley and the other girls he'd chased and cut loose. Not me, the one he'd finally caught, only to admit he'd pursued me for a reason. I understood that now. I wished I could have understood it then. I wished I could have said something in that last moment, before he let go. He'd told me it was okay. His last words to me. Why couldn't they have been my last words to him? The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.